think it's recording now.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to say I loved the event. It was amazing. I loved hearing all the women. It was beautiful. So I just wanted
Qué
to
bueno.
start with that.
That's great. That's
I
great.
do have a list of questions.
Yes.
And we don't have to get through them all, but I think we should. I think we'll be fine.
Okay.
So I work for Latina Republic, and it's a nonprofit. We work on changing stereotypes that people have of Latinos not only living abroad, but also here in the US. A lot of negative stereotypes. Why do they have them? I don't know. But, thankfully, we have people like you and other people that work on changing that narrative. So I think what you do is awesome. And starting with that, killing stereotypes, I want to know, what are some common misconceptions of Dominicans here in the US?
Oh, and thank you so much for inviting me, Vanessa. I think the misconception of Dominicans and potentially I can see where there might be some truth into it, is that they don't come to the States to stay. Unlike most immigrants, they usually don't have a place to go back to. If you look at the Cubans, the Nicaraguans, the Venezuelans now, and some other countries like Honduras and even Haiti, the conditions are so poor and so with no prosperity in mind or anything to look forward to, that these communities come and they set roots in the United States and they become active participants of society and communities. And Dominicans don't. Dominicans have been here even before Cubans arrived to the state of Florida. And although our numbers might not show it nationally, because we're still the fourth Hispanic population, and when it comes to amount, yet there's still this underlining conceptions that Dominicans don't count on them for your vote, don't count on them to canvass, or don't count on them to go out and fight for social causes, because they're not here to stay. They're just here to better their lives for a certain period, and then they leave back to their country of origin.
Wow, I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And they don't get the same amount of treatment here as they do with Cubans?
No, they don't. As a matter of fact, we've had, our country, of the ones that I've mentioned, or any other country in Latin America, we're the only country that's had more than 50 years of continuous democratic transition without a hiccup. And I'm even including countries like Chile, countries like Colombia, countries, bigger countries, even Brazil, Argentina. We are the only country that's really gone through that whole 50 plus years with no interruption. And for when it comes to the United States as a economic or even a political partner, we're located like in the middle of the Caribbean basin, and which puts us in a very strategic place when it comes to not only safeguarding the relationship with Cuba, but also safeguarding now what would be the relationship with Venezuela. And on occasions, we also serve to be the mediator. So Dominican Republic is, maybe, I don't know if this show goes on beyond Florida, but it's the most important business partner of South Florida when it comes to its ports, whether it's Miami Port or the other one. So it's a silent powerhouse that has a lot to offer, but then again, the lack of Dominicans wanting to stay more than they have to in the States, in a certain sense, have become a detrimental factor for us, where politicians and decision makers don't see us as true Americans. But that is starting to change. It usually happens after the fifth or sixth generation.
Wow. Well, I hope it keeps on changing.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Moving on, what does it mean to be a member of the Dominican diaspora?
You know what? The diaspora comes from the word, and maybe you know it, but I need to, maybe those that are watching this interview, to maybe consider what is diaspora? Why does he use it, and what does it mean? Well, it comes from the Greek term of disperse, to be dispersed. The way to pronounce it is diaspora. And diaspora was originally given as a title to the Jewish communities that had to leave the land, the sacred lands of what today is called Israel. So they were the first communities around the world that lived outside of their land of origin, which is what diaspora is, the congregation of people from one same place living outside of that place. The reason why I started using the term diaspora was, I would say in the last 10 years, immigrant, which used to be a word of pride, a person that it's willing to leave their country and everything to start from zero just because of the offer of an idea called America, to me was, and to everybody else was the most beautiful title one can receive, a nation of immigrants, to be an immigrant. Yes, I'm a first and second generation immigrant. It was a sense of pride. But in the last 10 years, that term acquired a negative connotation where it was referred to as an immigrant, a person who doesn't speak your language, who doesn't have your skin, who doesn't have your way of life, maybe not even your values, who you really don't know if that's a real name, and whose purpose for coming into this country you're not really sure of. And when I started seeing that, I started saying, you know what, I think it's time to start switching the term from immigrants to diasporas, because communities speak of riches, of cultural richness, of intellectual richness, and other types of richness. And as of that moment, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to stick with the term diaspora. And I just walked right into the theme, into the topic.
Wow, that's beautiful. I did not know that. I did not know it came. History lesson there. Thank you. And
yes.
Do you consider yourself part of that diaspora? And
yes. And you know what? And not everybody, although everybody is a member, not everybody is an active member, because diaspora doesn't determine the quality of the person who belongs to it, but just the fact that it's you may call it a symbolic designation. If you're living in South Florida and you're from Peru, for example, regardless of whether you interact with your community or not, you are part of the Peruvian diaspora.
Yes.
Now, although you probably noticed that I don't have an accent, so you probably ask yourself, so since when have you been here? So I'll take maybe 30 more seconds than I had to, but so you can understand my where I come from. At the age of 3, mom and my sister, which was just a year younger than me, we were migrated to New York. After being there for 2 years, we migrated down to Miami, and we migrated from Dominican Republic. As a single mom, looking for opportunity, looking for the possibility of having a safer place for her kids, moved to Miami. At the age of 9, here comes the lesson, as Dominicans do. We went back to Dominican Republic. And we lived there until a hurricane came and redefined the conditions of living in the country. Mom said, it's time to go back to Miami. In that process, I finished middle school, what today is called middle school, high school. And when high school finished, I wasn't a great student. I've always been in humbly called intelligent, but I've never been a good student. So wow. I had to go to DR to study architecture because it was cheaper. I didn't get no grants. I didn't get no scholarships. It wasn't like that 25 years ago. Like today, you can get a Pell Grant because of nothing, or financial aid because of nothing. It wasn't like that. So I had to go to DR and at the age of 18 and study architecture. At the age of 21, my mom visits me in DR and sees that her son has turned into a bohemian that thinks he's going to save the world, like most architects do around the world. I know architecture in the United States is not taught like that, but in the rest of the world, the architect is considered practically a godlike professional. It's when they tell you el arquitecto fulano de tal, that is a big deal. He's like up there with the doctors and the lawyers, and even higher than the lawyers. It's considered a title of high respect. A person that's an architect is considered a person of high respect. So mom goes and she did, you would call an intervention with my friends from high school, and they took me out of DR. And I brought me back. And when I got here, sadly, no college would take any of my credits, and I had to start from zero again. And right when I was halfway through studying in college. I already had been 5 years in college, and I was only halfway. So I decided to apply to University of Florida, and I was able to get in. And when I got to Gainesville, I sneaked away and I went to Dominican Republic, and my mom did not know that till months later. And I picked up right where I left off 2+ years after. I mean, before. So after I become an architect in DR, I was always interested in working with government. So and I might be extending this question, but I think it's important that
Oh,
you
this
know.
is amazing. Thank you.
So in DR, when you're studying architecture, they send you to the barrios. They send you to low income places. Sometimes dangerous, sometimes not. So you can understand what is the necessary space required for a person to live with dignity, whether it's a bedroom, a living room, and how communal living, how a sidewalk is really the porch of a poor man's house, and how the patio is a communal space of enjoyment, of communication, of gossiping, of information, of even of safety, right? And of course, of combined chores, whether it's washing clothes or washing dishes or restrooms. And in that process, I acquired a great sensitivity for low community and low income communities. And I understood that time at that moment, and I was not yet finished with studying architecture. I understood that architecture is not a craft or a tool for designing homes, buildings, and commercial structures, that it's really a social tool. And it's a social tool that brings a quality of living to everyone that I can touch with that craft. And right there, I understood, and I won't be able to do it from a drafting table. I need to do it from a political position. And about a year and a half after that, I became assistant secretary in the government.
Wow.
And I just went to study architecture.
Wow. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's when like everything happens for a reason,
Mhm, mhm.
and so you would say seeing all that influenced you to expand your not only sticking to one thing but being a voice.
Yeah.
Getting
Yeah.
more voices.
I think if you're going to speak for others, first you got to make sure that your values are in line with what people need that bullhorn for. It's never about you. You got to continuously remind yourself of that. You can never break down in a speech or be cheap yourself into cheap applauses. You got to understand that every time you have a mic or a person listening, it's a platform for you to push forward that either topic or that policy or those people that you say you represent.
Wow. And how did being between the US and DR shaped you as a person? How did you retain your Dominicanness here in the US, or how do you keep retaining it?
Yeah. Okay. So at the at the age of 26, I was studying in DR. I had not become an American citizen, although I
Yeah.
have been in this country since the age of 3, because I had this internal willingness or unwillingness to become an American unless I was able to keep my Dominican nationality. So at the age of 26, DR, through a constitutional decree or a constitutional um, amendment, they permitted Dominicans abroad to also hold the Dominican nationality. And at that moment, I became an American, living in DR, serving in DR government. And after that whole government experience, I stayed maybe total of an extra 4 or 5 years after the experience. And then I asked myself, okay, I came to DR. I did my thing. I became an architect. I served in government. I served for the United Nations. Now what? And everything added up to coming back to Miami. And I came back to Miami at the age of 32. And I met my mother, the mother of my children. And funny enough, she wasn't going to have that diaspora, community, politician life. It's more of a 9 to 5, barbecues on Saturday, soccer games on Sundays, you know. And I submitted myself to that. And I, for 10 years, I did not interact with Dominican people.
Wow.
I did not. And one day I woke up and I saw that I had become a person very different from the one that I wanted to be, or the one that I was. And the reason, the way how I got back with the community was in the simplest of ways, and it's listening. So I had a conversation with a person and asked them, why did you come here? How did you get here? And tell me your story. And in the end, I would always ask them, so are you considering going back? And the question was always answered in the same fashion. And it was yes. And when one conversation I posted on the Facebook, and a person asked for a second conversation, and then 2 weeks later I did a second conversation, and that thing just became huge, and it became the conversations with the diaspora. And that conversation then led to a person asking me to write for a paper.
Wow.
And so one thing led to another. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And when you were starting to come here, in the beginning, did you have, and later on as well, did you have any unique issues of adaptations you have to face? Was it difficult having that language barrier in the beginning? And did you ever experience any employment discrimination?
If I would ask you that there was a certain time in the United States that even Latinos did not know where Dominican was, that would probably seem funny to you.
Yeah.
I have an article I wrote recently, because one of our music legends, his name is Johnny Ventura, he just passed about 5 or 6 weeks ago. And I wrote an article called When They Did Not Know Where I Was From. And it was an episode I had when was in 3rd grade in Shenandoah Elementary, and how I would insist with these Cuban and Puerto Rican children that I come from this place called Dominican Republic, but they didn't know where it was.
Wow.
And I would explain to them on the palm of my hand, well, here's Puerto Rico, here's Cuba, here's Haiti, and then I would say, and we're here. He goes, okay, we don't see it on the map. And back then, all those globe maps that we have in classrooms all had that, it only said Haiti and never said Dominican Republic. And it was something just because of design. It wasn't that it was on purpose to exclude us, but the name is so long that the map, the globe, people that would do the globe, they would just put Haiti over the little island, rather than put Dominican Republic. You know.
Wow.
And so, and in giving light to your question of if I've ever had any discrimination, funny enough, most of the discrimination has come at the fact that an overqualified Latino, it's a threat. And that is even sadder than having an unqualified one, because it shows you that idea that the land of opportunity and the possibility of everyone being equal, even when you do things right, you still not even have the upper hand. You still can't match what is expected for themselves. And I'm referring to the ones that have been here longer than Latinos. So yeah, my greatest discrimination has always been that.
Wow. That's awful.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's insane. And what are some ways you cope with emotional attachment to your homeland?
You know what? The thing with diasporas and individual immigrants is that everything that they feel for their country is based on nostalgia of how things were better when I used to live there. So people are living in a sense, an emotional past within them, tied to nostalgia that still makes them want to send money to family members, still wants them to make sure that their government in their island of or country of origin is not corrupt, or that things are getting better. It's all attached to emotion. That's why I said that by the sixth generation, if you're not able to include those that are born here that call themselves of whatever land, in my case, Dominican, if you don't include them and find a way to have a concrete inclusion, whether it's economic, culturally, or socially, you will lose that potential. You will lose that. I call it ese patrimonio. Um, it happens with Italian Americans. You go to New York and you can go to Little Italy and you can ask anybody there, where are you from? And they'll tell you, I'm Italian. But ask them when was the last time they went. And they say they've never gone. And it happens with everybody. And it happens with Irish people in Boston. And it happens with German folks in a little bit down in Philadelphia. And you ask them, where are you? And they'll say, no, I'm German or I'm Polish. But it already surpassed that sixth generation. There's really no connection to their land of origin. It's just but the name and some customs. And usually they're tied to food, music, and celebration.
Wow, that's so sad because like I always say, so it's always so important to never forget where you come from, because allí están las raíces,
Yeah, it's part of your richness, your
yeah,
individual richness. It
yeah,
is.
and I relate to that because even like my parents haven't been. I'm first generation, but
Mhm,
my parents haven't been back to their countries
mhm.
in years, so that's so
Yeah.
sad. So going on, like relating to that question of being an overqualified Latino is a threat. How important is it for the Dominican diaspora to continue attaining success in combating that?
Yeah, I think what you and I experienced this past weekend of bringing these five ladies, and they were vice or lieutenant governor to a Supreme Court justice to a delegate who has served 15 years in Maryland's legislature, or the lieutenant colonel who's the chief of the schools, the reserve schools of the U.S. Army. And you ask yourself, okay, now that's the first proof of being able to settle down and set roots in the place you're at.
Mhm.
Because once you do that, not only do you ensure the following generations the possibility of growth and insertion within the idea of America. This is a fabric, and unless you're willing to weave your way into it, you're just going to be a needle with a piece of thread outside of it. And that's why I say it's so important to be. And we can. I don't want to name communities, but I can. Or I don't know how vast this conversation is going to go, but I can name you two communities, and then and those communities, and I'm going to use them as an example without being detrimental. The Salvadoran community, they have a higher population than Dominicans in the United States.
Wow.
When was the last time you heard of something from the Salvadorian community?
Never. I think
Never. Never heard anything in that sense.
Mm.
And it's because they opted not to be part of the fabric. And when you don't have leaders and people that become part of the fabric, whether it's elected officials, decision makers, important impresarios, or be part of the public school system. Did you study here?
Yes.
Did you ever have a Salvadoran teacher?
Never.
Have you ever heard of a Salvadoran teacher, whether it's a PE or?
Nope.
So back to that conversation that we had on Friday in the second conference, Diaspora conference. Sometimes you need to show communities in flesh and blood what it looks like so they know how to copy it. So from that, a lot of kids that probably went to the event, maybe younger kids, they were able to see a true New York Supreme Justice in front of them who 40 or 30 years ago was just like them, a kid in an audience. And like they said in their stories, they've been public servants for all their life, ever since they were 9-year-olds and they were helping the neighbor translate into English what the lady from the food stamp office was telling her. So, but we need to see it in flesh and blood, which is what I think it's what finally happens with communities when they decide to move forward and grow.
Did you ever see that when you were younger? Did you like that, seeing a successful Dominican in the US? Did you ever feel like your story was represented in the best
No.
way?
No,
Yeah.
no, no. I did no. In fact, no. I can't even think of it. No,
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah. I wish I had that when I was little too. I didn't really feel like I didn't see anybody that I could relate to growing up as well. So being able to now, I think the world that we live in, expand that to even younger generations of Latinos, I think it's beautiful. So not all Latin experience are the same. How would you define Dominicanness and the unique migratory experience of Dominicans?
I think I'm going to base it off two basic examples. We have, before America was America, the first melting pot was really the island of that's called Hispaniola, which we call Quisqueya. It's a native term, and that refers to itself as the mother of all lands, even though it's a little island. So yeah, I guess our natives had a really big ego, right? So, and then I want to. And then you're going to ask me the question again, because now I'm going to elaborate a little bit on something that has to do with culture.
Okay.
So let's say, as an architect or as a normal person, you go into a building, what do you go through to get into the building?
Door. Then.
Exactly. And you go to your house, you go into a door. To get into a car, what do?
Open
Go through a door. Exactly. That island became the door for Europe and Africa into the New World.
Wow.
So anything that exists outside of Native Americans, and I mean Native Amerindians, or I mean, the ones in Central America or the ones in South or the ones in North America. Everything that came from Europe and Africa that exists within this whole hemisphere went through that door. So think about this, from having the first slave trade to the first Europeans taking advantage of whatever it is that they did. And we all know what they did. And we can't judge them on today's terms. There was different times.
Yeah.
And the Spaniards and the French and the Portuguese. And now you bring in African culture and how we eat and what type of music we listen to. And it sets you in a path to understanding that the place I come from was that doorway, and that some musical artists have identified 23 different drum beats that exist in the hemisphere, all started because they came in through that doorway. In DR, in Highland of the Dominican Republic, or in Quisqueya, you have beats that sound like samba. You have beats that sound like cumbia. You have beats that sound like guaracha from Cuba. You have beats that sound like Panamanian music. You have beats that sound like even Argentinian tango. And you tell yourself, but no, that probably happened afterwards. And no, it's just that it serves, when you serve as a doorway, you permit yourself that level of, back to answering your question, that level of complexity that being open to migrants represents. So in a sense, my country was kind of like the first America in that sense, that big melting pot of little things that ended up, I mean, where does mestizo come from? It's something that you need to ask yourself when it started there. Or when does the light skin African American come from? I mean, it starts there. Or where does the Oriental, dark skin Oriental come from? And then you start thinking, wait a second, I had never thought about it, that everything came through there.
Wow. That's I didn't even know this. I'm learning so much because I've never. Wow. Let's see. What unique challenges have Dominicans faced in the US to achieve economic empowerment, political representation, and cultural citizenship?
That's important because although some Dominicans were here, initially there was a part of us that was very reluctant to being an American because the United States invaded Dominican Republic in 1917 and then in 1961 as well. So that, in a sense, put us in a path of we'll live here, but we'll not be like you. And that was very, I would say, it wasn't received well because I guess nobody wants to have a person living in their home and not speak to the owner of the house, you know. But when it comes to being able to access that citizenship, the importance of being an American citizen, it took us at least 2 or 3 generations to understand that it didn't make us. The way I like to say it is, it doesn't make us less Dominicans to be American, but
Mhm.
but being a great American makes us so much better Dominican. There's
Mm.
values of compassion, of constitutionality, of, I think compassion is possibly the best American of all traits and all values. And that just enhances whatever we bring to this country from our own original values. So just to rephrase that again, being a good American makes you so much better Dominican.
Wow. Yeah, I agree with that as well.
Mhm.
Um, and do you feel a sense of responsibility to carry the values and the image of Dominicanness and represent your country?
Oh
Uh,
yes. Oh
here
yes,
in America?
totally, totally. I decided I decided to do 2 things. I was going to empower myself with a discourse or with a speech and a voice, but I needed to understand that I had to be different, that I had to break the cycle of being an echo chamber for whatever happens in the island to transmit it here. The reason why I did that is because we, as members of any diasporas or any immigrant community, we are exposed to different realities on a daily basis, very different than the people that are living in our countries of origin. As a matter of fact, we are exposed to 10, 12 cultures on a daily basis. From just going to a cafeteria, you can expose yourself to 3 different cultures and not even know it, and go home and make decisions based on that influence for the tiniest of moment. It impacts you in a way that you don't know why you behave the way you do until you go back to your country of origin and you see certain friction between the way you act, react, or act upon. And it's because you have been exposed to other cultures that refine your behavior and at the same time your decision making and interaction. So when it comes to that aspect of having a voice, I needed to make sure I projected the idea that we can no longer speak, think, and behave like our counterparts in the island or in our country of origin, because it would only be cheating ourselves and our country of the richness that we acquire here by daily exposure to different cultures.
Wow.
Let me put it to you this way. Um, Everybody knows about the conflict that the Dominican Republic has when it comes to immigration with Haiti.
Uh-huh.
Sharing an island is sharing a territory is bad. Sharing an island, imagine that. Now sharing an island with a person, with a group that doesn't speak your language, doesn't have your religious values, and it doesn't look like you.
Right.
But thirdly, which is something that's, maybe you give me 30 seconds,
No,
it's a little history lesson.
no, go for it.
So Cuba got its independence from Spain, right?
Yes.
And again, we can continue talking. US got their independence from England,
Yes.
and Mexico got their independence from Spain. And you can continue down the line and you'll see that everybody eventually got their independence from their motherland.
Yes.
Now ask, where did Dominicans get their independence from? And you would say Spain.
Spain. Yeah.
And how about if I told you that it's Haiti?
No way.
Yes,
No way.
yes. And this is how it happened. The Spaniards got to the island. Eventually, it became a colony. And after they went through everything, besides killing the natives and the whole thing, they saw that there was no longer productive conditions within the island for them to continue developing that colony the way they wanted to. So they picked up and left after 3 generations and left a group of Dominican Spaniards or Spaniards, right? Second and third generation Spaniards, and just picked up and left and started from fresh in Cuba. So all the mistakes they did in Spain, I mean, in Quisqueya, right? They just dropped it and they just went anew over to Cuba, the island. And then the French saw an opening, and the French came and they took over the island. And the unwillingness of these Spanish descendants of first and second generation to work with the French forced the French to have to bring slaves from Africa. And they brought so many that eventually those slaves turned on the French, and the French had to leave. And now those descendants of Spaniards who had been waiting for years, are you guys coming back? Are you gonna, the French are here. Are you guys coming back? Now the slaves took over the land, and are you coming back? And right there when we understood, there's nobody coming back. We have to independent ourselves from these slaves that just became owners of the island. And at that moment, we launch the independence war.
And saved yourselves.
Yes. And then we end up becoming independent from Haiti. So there's that tension of always between Haitians and Dominicans, is that we were liberated from them.
Yes.
But in a sense, they were the first people to be liberated from their motherland, I guess, in America, even before the United States.
And how's the daily life of Dominicans and Haitians sharing that island? What are specific?
First, it's an immigration issue. Nobody's really holding a grudge from 150 years ago, But there is that discriminatory component. They are so different from us.
Completely.
Very. Yeah, totalmente distinta. Entonces, French, Spanish, and they migrate to Dominican Republic for the need of work, like most immigrants do. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the scenes on TV lately of those Haitian migrants trying to cross Rio Grande and Texas, and how our U.S. officers, border officers are treating them, and those people are coming from Chile. They had escaped to go to Chile. They became migrants in Chile, and about a year ago, they expelled them from Chile. So they've been walking from Chile to the U.S.-Mexico border since last year.
Wow.
Thousands. So I can identify when I see that, because I've seen them in Dominican Republic. Now, some of them cross over and stay. Some of them get work permits, but mostly the jobs that they do are jobs that don't transcend too much, because they've lost all social structure. None of them, those that show up, are really have ever gone to a school, let alone finish elementary. But there's never a conflict of one that, although there's people that do like to live off of that, but there's never a conflict of any tension that might cause the possibility of a confrontation, whether it's militarily or politically.
Okay. Wow. So they see that they might have a lot more of a better opportunity in the DR.
Yes.
Haiti, because I don't know how the DR is economically, but I'm sure it's a lot better than Haiti.
Yeah.
Right? Because Haiti is not doing so well socioeconomically, and I could imagine. And how important is it for your family seeing what you do and retaining that Dominican-American identity and how important is that even for your family to retain both identities and being, like you said, a better American, a good American to be a good Dominican.
Yeah. In the beginning, they didn't get it. They didn't.
Yeah.
They thought they were like, they would see me publish,
Yeah.
articles, and they would say, "Pero te están pagando por eso." And I'm like, why do we have to put a money value on everything? I mean, don't
Yeah.
you? This is way more important than whatever 50 or $500 I'm going to get for publishing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sí, pero dile que te publiquen, que te den dinero. So that was always funny. Or when I would go to TV shows in the beginning, I'm like, wow, I just got booked. I'm going to be on a TV show. Pero te están pagando. And it's always, you laugh because you can hear probably your mom's voice or your aunt's voice in me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You sound like my dad.
yeah, pero te están pagando.
Te están
Entonces,
pagando.
and so, it took them a while. And then they didn't understand because I write through the lens of a person, of an immigrant.
Yes.
So I look at things differently. And just to end that conversation on Haitians, and I'll tell you how a person being exposed to different cultures and different opinions and different experiences here in the United States cannot have the same opinion about a subject that a person may have in our country of origin. Now, if you ask me, or you ask 100 Dominicans whether they were okay with the construction of a border wall between Mexico and United States, understanding that there are measures and ways to control the border where you do not have to, although you may physically create a border because it's necessary, but the reason and the purpose for which it was posed was incorrectly, because it was one of exclusion. And this country has never excluded anyone that comes with its, with need to its shores. So the fact of saying, Dominicans, do you believe, Dominican-Americans, do you believe in the construction of a border wall? And 99 would have said no. Now you ask 100 Dominicans in Dominican Republic, do you believe in the construction of a border wall between you and Haiti? And 99 will say yes.
Wow.
So
Right.
to be able to give voice to those that are like me in the diaspora, I needed for them to accept first that we were going to be equal in sense, but very different from the folks in the island. That's why we needed to stop being echo chambers, because we had opinions that were different from those in the island.
Yes.
And secondly, with the writing and empowering people with a new voice came the fact of seeing things not through the reality of the island, but through the possibility of the island.
Okay.
And only people that are outside of a forest can usually tell the richness of its woods and the richness of its leaves and everything, the ferns that cover it. Sometimes if you're stuck in the middle of a forest, you can't see how big it is. You really can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
So us from the outside, we're able to see that.
Wow, that's interesting. That both mentalities, same but very, very different, and a lot has to do with being surrounded by different cultures and people that think differently. What would you say to those Dominicans in the island that think that way, and how to probably broaden the way that they think and their mentalities in the situation going on?
I think all political measures require regulation or legislation. I understand that as part of how we decided to structure government and all be in accordance, right, to the will of law. But there's a component that's called humanity, which transcends our time here on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And we only have this small period, whether for some people it could be 2 years, and for other people it could be 20, for other can be 60, and happily for most it would be 80.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that person's only life and had no choice on deciding how their life was going to be. But the conditions where they were placed were one of true impossibility when it comes to living a life to its fullest, and not only in sentiment, but in achievement. And I think that's the component that's missing from those migratory decisions, is that it's never looked upon as humanity. And it's not. And I think humanitarian should be possibly the best aspiration that we as a global society should put forth in the 21st century.
I agree. Yep.
Hmm.
Going with what you're saying with writing, you write through the lens of a immigrant. What made you wake up one day and go, you know what, I'm gonna write a book, not one but two, possibly even three. How was that? And putting all those stories together and finding that inspiration to highlight these voices and teaching people this narrative of Dominican immigrants here in the US.
Yeah. Originally, I started writing for ego, and I guess everybody does. First I was dared into it.
Okay.
And I was dared into it, and it took me 6 weeks to come up with something because I didn't know what I was going to write about. And then after being dared, it was all about, I would stay up till 12 o'clock at night. And I usually go to sleep like around 10:30, but I would stay up till 12 because I knew the next day I'm going to be published. And I want to wait till 12 because right at 12, they load up all the information and you can see all the new articles, all the op-eds and whatever. So I would go, oh, I got published here. Oh, I got published there. And one day, like maybe a year into writing, a friend of mine tells me, "You're writing a lot." He says, "And I know you have a lot of material, and it's not. You're not being redundant. You're really writing a lot." And then he tells me, "But it'll come a time when you have to write so you can be read and heard because you have something to say, not because you want to be published." And I understood that in that moment that I had acquired a responsibility with the way I write that transcended the simple act of just getting published. Because now what you're saying, it became part of a collection of ideas and exposures of over a topic so dense and at the same time that nobody had ever touched before. The publisher says that my original book is a pioneering book because nobody has ever written about 50 different topics in one book seen through the lens of a diaspora. It also has some personal notes. For example, the last chapter of the first book, it deals with very personal things. And it tells us the last article or the last part of that chapter deals with the immigrant who brought me. And it's the story of my grandma.
Wow.
And the second book has something in that sense also. It closes with the experience of a Cuban stepfather, el cubano que me crió.
Wow.
And then I kind of like merged those examples of his upbringing and how his loss of a country is an inspiration for keeping mine and doing what I need to do for it. Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful.
So it's a whole bunch of topics. The third book might come along. I don't have it in program, but I do have a third book in mind, which will probably finish that collection, the Diaspora y Desarrollo collection.
Yeah.
Because architects plan stuff like that.
Wow.
So yeah, but I just hope everybody gets to, if not read me, at least go out there and just tickle with the possibility of seeing your life and your worth and who you really are by reading about your community, not necessarily in numbers and digits, but in true cultural aspects. And there's a question I ask everybody that goes to their country of origin, and I ask them, when you got on the plane and the plane took off, did you cry? And you'll be surprised, Vanessa, everybody does. And the day that you're able to go back to your parents' country of origin, or for some reason they are able to go back, and they don't instill it in you, try to go back. And I promise you, once the plane takes off to come back, you're going to break down crying and you won't know why.
I'm already emotional thinking about it.
And when you do get there, you'll feel like you are not a foreigner. You'll feel that you belong, that these are your people. Oh, this is why I behave like this. Oh, this is why I eat this. Oh, everything that you find, oh my God, ya estábamos comiendo empanadas de whatever. It's normal for them. But remember what I mentioned in the beginning, nostalgia.
Mhm.
Nostalgia is the driver of everything here. And once you take that trip and you interact, you try not to go to a resort. Don't try to go to, sightseeing. That'll come later. It's the interaction in the corner, having juice or soda or a beer with friends, or una velada en la noche, and having a guy pull up a guitar and start declamando, and then I just say, oh my God, what have I been missing?
Yeah.
That's what happened to me when I went to study architecture. I became a Dominican.
Wow.
And every time I go and I come back in the plane, I cry.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. I am looking forward for that one day to go. Well, to close this off, just one final question. What influenced you to make that event highlighting women?
Yeah.
The importance of highlighting women in power
Yeah.
for other, not only just the diaspora, but young Dominican female lead,
Yeah.
that strive to one day make it big one day.
I'm the product of the efforts of three women. I had a great grandmother who left the countryside and came to the capital in search of betterment, for her family and for her offspring that she would yet to meet or know. And she started off very, very poor woman. Never went to school, not one day.
Wow.
And she had a little wood table made up of remains of other woods, and desechos, right? And she just would buy some bananas and some plátanos and some yuca and whatever. And she would just stand in front of her little wooden house in the capital, and then that became a little bigger, and then that became a little bigger. Never big enough to consider a business, but and yet it was something. And she was a single mom with two girls, of which one of them was my grandmother, who then became like a small businesswoman, had her kids. When I mean small businesswoman, I might be giving an exaggeration title. Maybe it's a micro businesswoman. Like she didn't go but maybe to fourth grade, and she would go to a store to buy fabric. Then she was known in banks and in restaurants. Oh, there's that lady that sells fabric. I want to do a shirt for me or whatever. And she would just show up, because accessibility to clothing back then in the 50s and 60s, it was really, you had to really tailor most of your clothes if you wanted them to look good. And so one day a person offered her, have you ever considered going to America? She was 40 plus, maybe going on to 50, which in the 60s, a person that was 50 was at the last inning of the game. The game was done. What are you going to do at the age of 50 in America? Start from zero. So she came and she paid her dues by working at a factory and then taking care of Jewish rich kids. Became una nanny, and then after that, my mom had me when we got also a single mom when we got to New York. She didn't have a craft. Mom was a cashier, then she was a waitress, then she was a cashier some other place, and then she decided to study cosmetology and became una peluquera and a hairdresser, which is a very Dominican thing. And and I didn't know I was poor till the age of 13. Grandma and mom hid that from me because they wanted me to create mis propios alcances, to think that I was a middle class boy, and have expensive taste and have expensive.
Not feel the difference.
Exactly. So they were basing my interest around a circle that did not correspond with my reality. and they were doing it on purpose. At the age of 4, I remember always sitting at the top of the table. Tú eres el hombre de la casa. The food never served on one plate, served on different plates from which I would serve myself at the age of 4 and 5. So by the time of 13, I'm already set as a person of high expectations who doesn't think of himself any less than, doesn't have to fight that struggle of coming out of poverty or being, demoralized because I come from a low wage owner family or earning family. And once I found out at 13 that all my life I had been poor, I was kept from that. I decided from that moment on to pay them back. And I pay them back with my actions and the person that I've become. So when the opportunity came to provide a conference that I could exalt the greatness of Dominican women, of Dominican period, I said, you know what, I'll make it an homage to those 3 women.
Wow, that's beautiful. Almost brought me to tears.
Yeah, a lot of people that went to the conference said they cried when they heard the stories of the panelists. Mm-hmm.
Well, you are a perfect, what's the word? You are the outcome of the way they raised you. They didn't keep your mentality in a box, but they wanted you to always dream big.
Let me tell you this little joke. Well, I remember at the age of maybe 7 or 8, being in 3rd grade, and it's going to be, well, back then we didn't take Thanksgiving off, or maybe we did, I don't remember. And I remember that the teacher said, okay, with brown bags, this group is going to be the Indians, and then who are the ones that are going to do the black hats? And we had like arts and craft class. We were all doing our little costumes or whatever. And I kind of like never paid too much attention to the hats or the pilgrim hat or the Native American brown paper. You can imagine what it is, right? You've seen them 100 times. Yes. And so I go and I tell Mom, Mom, they're going to have that activity on Thursday. I got to go dressed up to school. And she tells me, how are you going dressed? And I go, well, some kids are going as pilgrims, some kids are going as Indians. I want to wear like a black suit. And she said, black suit? Like, why do you need a black suit? And then I remember getting to school, whatever. She put me a black suit and a little tie, and I went to school. And all my friends are either pilgrims or Indians. And they asked me, where are you going? You going someplace after this? Why are you dressed up? The teacher's like, what? You're supposed to come as a pilgrim. You go, no, I came as John F. Kennedy. I won't be president. I'm dressed up as a president.
You always knew. See? Wow.
No, I'd always find it funny to say that.
Wow. You could already with a child, you could already tell specific aspects and how they're going to be when they grow up.
True.
That's hilarious. Wow.
Yes, it is.
Ya sabías desde pequeño. Ya estaba dicho. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording now. Let me see.